Good afternoon. I'm Tony Zanino, president of the Guardians of Martin County, and I want to thank you very much. We are very fortunate this afternoon to have some very distinguished guests, and if they would stand up, please. Sarah Hurd. Ed Campy. Eileen Vargas. And Blake Capps. We were also very fortunate this fall to have the passage of Martin County Forever. And I'd like to acknowledge Jim Snedeker, who was co-chair of that effort. Now, some of you will remember several years ago at the Board of County Commissioners meeting when they were approving the Rural Lifestyle Amendment, there was a commissioner that stood up and said, what we really need is a study of the Western lands to better understand what is outside the urban service boundaries. There was general applause to that thought. Over the years, the Commission has dragged their feet on commissioning this study. At the same time, they've been approving developments outside the urban service boundaries. So the Guardians, who felt this study was critically important, turned to 1,000 Friends of Florida to see if we could not conduct one ourselves. They introduced us to the University of Florida's Center for Landscape Conservation Planning, who had recently been hired by the state to map the wildlife corridor and to do a study of the effects of population growth and sea level rise throughout the state. Fortunately, they agreed to do a study just of Martin County, and the 1,000 Friends of Florida agreed to hold this workshop to present it. So I would like to thank you all for coming, but to thank especially and introduce you to Paul Owens, president of 1,000 Friends.
Thank you, Tony, and I will add my thanks to his for everyone who took their time to come out this evening. I see a lot of familiar faces. I'm especially thankful to the leaders in Martin County who have taken some time to join us this evening. So thank each and every one of you. We're grateful to the Guardians for generously commissioning the study that Tony referred to from the University of Florida. We've been in partnership with them on a number of these studies in counties around the state and presenting their findings. So any discussion of growth and development in Martin County inevitably brings up the so-called Martin County difference. And that is the term that refers to the largely successful efforts to maintain a higher level of protection for the environment and quality of life in the county, certainly relative to its neighbors to the north and south. And speaking from the perspective of the leader of a statewide organization, we are based in Tallahassee, and Florida has 67 counties and 411 municipalities. So there's a lot for us to keep track of with a small staff. But speaking from that perspective, I can confirm that there is indeed a Martin County difference. It's not just a slogan. And there are, I think, a couple of reasons that explain that. One reason, of course, is your comprehensive plan that was drafted with the input of leaders like Maggie Hirschala and Nat Reed, and defended by them and others in 1,000 Friends, the Guardians, and other groups in Martin County over the years. But the other factor that I would mention is the informed engagement of dedicated citizens here in Martin County. Folks in this county make it their business to be informed and involved in planning discussions. I haven't been to all 67 counties in the 6.5 years that I've been with 1,000 Friends, but probably to at least half of them. And I will tell you that in most counties, if you mention the comp plan, you will get a blank stare, but not in Martin County. People in Martin County understand the comprehensive plan and its foundation for balanced and orderly growth decisions. So informed and engaged citizens in Martin County are one of this county's greatest assets. And you all should pat yourselves on the back for that. And the fact that you're here tonight, taking some time tonight, shows that you are continuing in that tradition. So with that acknowledgement, I hope tonight's presentation will maintain that critical engagement as county leaders and their constituents confront the kind of decisions that will determine the future of Martin County and whether or not that Martin County difference lives on for future generations. With that, I am going to turn the presentation tonight over to the brains in our outfit, Kim Dinkins, who is our policy and planning director, a former senior planner in Marion County, an expert on water policy who worked for the Department of Environmental Protection, who's going to walk us through the findings from the University of Florida's research that we're sharing with you here tonight. So, Kim. Like that?
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay, thanks. Oh. Better? Maybe we'll put this on. Oh, I'll just move it over. Okay, is that on?
Okay. Yeah.
Nope.
There you go.
1 minute, thank you.
Sure.
So Paul introduced me as the brains, but I will say that I am probably the person in the room with the least local knowledge of Martin County. As he mentioned, I'm from Marion County, and I have worked throughout the state, but not on comprehensive plan issues everywhere. I will say that where we have been over the past few months, I can tell you that Martin County would be the most knowledgeable about comprehensive plans. I'm going to pull my presentation up here real quickly. And as Tony and Paul mentioned, we are here on behalf of the Guardians of Martin County, presenting information that was gathered by the University of Florida. So we did not develop any of this data. We did just provide input and then facilitate the meetings with Martin County, the Guardians of Martin County, and the University of Florida. So just a little bit about 1,000 Friends of Florida. As you may be aware, we had two founders, Dr. John DeGrove, who was known as the godfather of planning in Florida, and then Nathaniel Reed, who was local to Martin County and an environmental champion throughout the state and nationally recognized. 1,000 Friends was started on the heels of the 1985 Growth Management Act as a watchdog and to promote the citizen engagement that's so robust here in Martin County. Basically, that legislation said that every community needs a plan to provide meaningful planning standards for the development of land. And again, Martin County embraced this, which was not the case throughout the state. So that's led to this Martin County difference that's so colloquially known in the community, which is built upon the strong adherence to the plan and highly engaged community. As you're probably aware, the comp plan is the community's guide for growth. Underneath that comp plan are the land development regulations. Those are the regulations that determine how that guide will be implemented. Underneath those regulations are the development order, which is essentially your site plan that is specific to a development based on adherence to those regulations. Within the comprehensive plan, there are basically two essential parts. The future land use map, which is the geographical representation of what land uses are desired or authorized within the jurisdiction, and then elements, which are essentially the text and policies that describe planning principles, goals, objectives, and policies that address things like where will we extend our water and sewer, what are our development criteria for environmentally sensitive lands like wetlands and coastal properties, what are our levels of service for transportation, and how will money be appropriated for infrastructure. Our policy priorities at 1,000 Friends of Florida are to preserve natural and agricultural land from not all development, but premature development or unnecessary development, restoring and protecting environmental treasures, defending the planning process, both locally and at the state level, expanding the supply of affordable housing, promoting transportation alternatives, so away from cars, more mass transit, more walkability in our communities, and bikeability, and then fighting climate change and preparing for sea level rise. Our work primarily is divided into three buckets. We track legislation and lobby the legislature to protect those planning regulations. We work with citizens, community and state leaders, conservation and business groups when issues arise that they need assistance with understanding. And then we connect people with planning. So that's what we're doing here tonight. And the main ways that we do that, one of the main ways that we do that is by tackling important issues such as how legislation might impact communities or what we might expect to see under different development scenarios. In 2016, as Paul mentioned, we released Florida 2040 and 2070, which looked at how much land might be lost to development under existing conditions versus increasing densities in our urban areas. I believe Paul came and presented that in 2018 or 2019. In 2024, we looked at that information through the lens of what could happen if we increased densities and avoided priority agricultural and natural areas with the Agriculture 2040-2070 project. We've done similar presentations to this along the Big Bend in other more rural areas like Taylor County, Levy County, and Dixie County, which obviously were completely different stakeholders at that time in those regions. Just recently, we released a report that evaluates the economics of development in Florida. So if you have an opportunity, I would recommend that you go to our website and take a look at that report. We'll dive into it a little bit here, but it's very robust in its analysis. So high level, Ag 2040, 2070, roughly a third of the land in Florida is in agriculture, and we have the potential to lose about 45,000 acres per year over the next decades of that agricultural land. More than 120 acres per day. And what this map shows in red are those areas that are most likely to be lost. We expect to add about 12 million more people between now and 2040. Of that, we expect to lose 3.5 million acres of land to development. And of that 3.5 million acres, about 2.2 million acres is expected to be greenfield or new development in currently agricultural areas. That means that our ag component of those new developed areas is about 60% of the new development, and a loss of about 20% of the total agricultural land throughout the state. So, as was mentioned before, the Guardians of Martin County asked us to help facilitate working with the University of Florida to dive deeper into trends in Martin County. As you're probably aware, when you look at something from a statewide level, we miss little nuances and things that are important to and that have happened within a local community. So we wanted to make sure that we had a good understanding of the local situation and ensure that we were accounting for new developments. Tonight, we want to just really begin a discussion. So we understand that this is new information for everyone. We actually haven't had it that long. So we want to hear from you all what you think about our alternatives, what the things are that are concerning you. We want to engage you as citizen planners and introduce tools that might be able to protect Western lands. In this presentation, as I mentioned, we took a closer localized look at Martin County in the context of protecting agriculture and natural areas, prioritizing development in the urban surface districts. And our refined scenarios are based on local knowledge and accounting for recent development approvals, such as the ranch and Discovery. This is a pretty self-explanatory slide. It just lets us know that we expect the population by 2040 to expand in Martin County by about 18,453 people. That's a little bit about the same as what we are seeing throughout the state, if not a little higher. So the way that Martin County absorbs these additional residents and utilizes effective land use planning strategies will determine the health of its environment, the quality of its residents, and ultimately the strength of its economy. The 2040 trend that was developed by the University of Florida assumed an existing density, or didn't assume, but determined an existing density of about 3.09 people per acre, with a projected increase of about 18,000 people by 2040. To determine where people might go, we looked at proximity to coastline, proximity to other urban areas, existing entitlements, including DRIs, PUDs, and in that pinkish red, you'll see the new developments that are outside of the urban growth boundaries. We also excluded things like water and wetlands from our analysis, so no development in water or wetlands. We'll see in this trend scenario, the business as usual, that the population increase is most obvious along I-95 in Indiantown. And when I say that these are projections, not predictions, so we don't know necessarily where people will go, but we expect that they would go here based on, again, proximity to the coastline, proximity to existing roads, and proximity to existing urban areas. So this results in about a loss of about 2,500 acres of current natural protected lands when we consider sea level rise based on NOAA's 2022 predictions. That actually that leads to a loss of the 2,000 acres, which right now you have 59,000 acres in natural areas, so you would essentially end up with, under a sprawl scenario, and no new protected areas, 57,000 acres of protected land, and 5,540 acres of newly developed greenfield. Under the conservation priority scenario, we removed all of the high priority conservation areas that have been acquired or not yet acquired, but that are anticipated for being acquired, such as the CERP properties, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, Preserve Area Management Plans, wetlands, again, which weren't even in our original, our existing agriculture, Florida Forever projects, and the Florida Wildlife Corridor, which we'll talk about in a minute. We did not exclude agricultural lands in our analysis if those agricultural lands were in the urban services area. So we heavily weighted development within the existing urban services areas. And what we see here is that we have the ability to protect about 18% of our natural lands, about 24% of our agricultural lands. Our developed land increases only by 3,714 acres in this scenario. And then the big take home here is that there's no development outside of existing urban service districts that is necessary in this planning horizon. So kind of looking at both of these and giving you a minute to digest them, I will let you know that we also have them up front here. All 18,000 people that are expected in 2040 can be accommodated in the existing urban service districts. Under our conservation scenario, we save about 1,826 acres of land that's not developed. We increase protected agriculture by 68,000 acres and protected natural lands by about 20,000 acres. So what are we saying when we talk about a 30% increase in density? I know a lot of times we say that and people are like, no, we don't want high rises. We don't want to amend our comprehensive plan to allow greater than 4 stories or 40 feet. First, Martin County has about 2.4 people per unit, looking at the most recent census. So even with 18,000 new people, we're looking at about 9,000 new units. Taking a sample of 5 acres with my little rough drawing here on the left, with one person represented in each of the homes, it's just over 15 units based on the current density. On the left, I have mainly single family with a couple of 2-dwelling units. You can see them, those are represented in that top little larger units. On the right, 4 times 5 is 20 units, and I just added a couple more single-family residents and 1 additional multifamily in that same area. So, rough graph to show that this doesn't mean that you're going to look like Sarasota necessarily. What this can look like is duplex developments, new infill redevelopment with duplexes and single-family residences in existing urban areas. So why do we need to protect natural lands? In addition to their economic and food security values, the ag lands throughout the state provide important ecosystem services, including protected water quality, flood control, climate resilience, sequestering carbon, harboring wildlife, and promoting outdoor recreation, which is a major contributor to the economy. In Martin County specifically, you're uniquely situated within the watersheds of some of Florida's most recognized and equally valuable water bodies. And then also the economic impact of agriculture in the community is about $1.4 billion of value added contribution, which represents about 19% of the total value added and a little less than 25% of your overall employment sector. Why else? Well, now's the time. It's a state priority. When Senate President Ben Albritton addressed the Senate in his opening speech, he said that opportunity in rural Florida doesn't mean development. He's discussing a new rural renaissance in Florida, so looking at ways to protect those rural areas is a priority for our Senate. The Florida legislature has also budgeted record amounts of money for land protection in the state, with over $2 billion to protect the Florida Wildlife Corridor. So what is the Florida Wildlife Corridor? It's an 18 million acre network of connected private and public lands that spans from the Everglades to the Panhandle. You'll notice in green that there are significant portions of the Florida Wildlife Corridor in Martin County, if you can see that small. And on the right-hand side in that map that's just to the east of Lake Okeechobee, that red is panther habitat. That is essentially in Martin County. So the Florida Wildlife Corridor is focused on protecting native species and megafauna like the panther and bears, but also other endangered species. Within Martin County, there are 169,000 acres, almost 170,000 acres within the network. One thing that I want to point out here is that in the Florida Wildlife Corridor is essentially the top 3 priorities of the Florida Ecological Greenways Network, which was developed by the University of Florida, and Tony mentioned. That was actually being developed when I was there, which was quite a while ago, so it's been vetted for quite a long time. There are 5 levels. The top 3 levels, the top 3 priorities are what is included in the Wildlife Corridor. And if you look at what is included in Martin County, all of the lands that are included in the Wildlife Corridor are those priority 1 lands. So they're really important and critical to the corridor. Right now, less than 50% of those are protected. In the red here, you see those lands that are slated for development or most at risk for development in the near future. So how do we protect natural and agricultural lands? We have market-based landowner opportunities such as conservation and mitigation banking in order to offset impacts of development. We have fee simple acquisition where people can sell their land to conservation organizations, or typically it's going to be the state or regional regional agencies. Conservation easements allow landowners to continue to farm or do whatever activities they want to do on their land in terms of agricultural production, but limit the amount of development that can happen. And then, of course, there's agritourism and ecotourism that help to offset some of the costs of production and provide an additional economic opportunity for landowners. And then In Martin County and throughout the state, we're seeing more projects that are consistent with the concept of payment for ecosystem services. So you have a water farm here in Martin County where the landowner was paid to essentially treat water on their property. There is a project in Southwest Florida with the Wildlife Commission where they are paying landowners to keep habitat for panthers. So that's kind of a pilot project that we'll have to see how it plays out over the next couple of years. And then the Florida Wildlife Corridor Foundation is looking at ways to increase corridor-compatible solar-type projects and corridor-compatible communities. So developments that are abutting that corridor to be putting in various types of development that or development processes that protect the corridor. So low impact development, things like clustering, keeping more of the land in conservation. Public policy strategies, things that can be adopted in the comprehensive plan and may be in Martin's comprehensive plan, are things like conservation subdivisions, where you cluster your development and keep additional open space. This is the type of development that is anticipated in the rural lifestyles type developments. The big thing here is to make sure that those conservation areas are protected into perpetuity. Other strategies are the transfer of development rights. That is where you basically take a community determines what the potential development or gives a credit for transferring certain development rights, units per acre typically, over into a more urbanized area. So a landowner who has 100 acres and is able to transfer 1 unit per 10 acres could have 10 units that they could sell to somebody who wants to develop in the urban area and increase their density there. So if that developer gets 5 units per acre and they have let's say they have 5 units per acre, they want to develop at a slightly higher density, they could buy one of those credits and put 6 units per acre. These are really, again, only effective where A, the local government is consistent with protecting their rural area and doesn't allow development in those rural areas already. A lot of times it's easier and less expensive to just ask for a land use amendment than it is to go through this whole process of getting a credit and putting it back into the urban area. And then local land referenda like you have here in Martin County, the Martin County Forever, really excited about that for Martin County and the work that's been done to protect lands at the local level and leverage those funds at the state and national funds. So on the flip side of how we protect rural areas, we have to look at the way that we develop our urban areas. Urban 3 worked with the University of Florida and 1,000 Friends of Florida to look at the benefits of compact development or the economics of development on Florida. In the surplus side, we see those rural, very densely populated areas that are not taxing the local government with infrastructure or needs for emergency services. And they are operating, so the way that what we were looking at here is what is the taxable revenue from these lands. So on the rural side, we see that they're not asking for a lot. There's not a lot of investment in those areas. On the densely urbanized areas, those lands are particularly paying for themselves, surplus of taxable income. In the subsidy side, we see what is predominantly found in Florida, which is our sprawl scenario. Fiscal responsibility matters. So financial returns to communities are based on taxes. They're relatively low in rural areas, but they produce an economic benefit to the community in dense, urbanized, mixed uses more than pay for themselves. More compact development is important not just for the fiscal impact to a community. Costs is one issue, but it also takes up less land to accommodate those new residents that helps us to save important natural and ag lands, creates more livable communities, and benefits health by giving more opportunities to walk, bike, socialize. You can probably take a look at what we have here, and would you like to live in the top scenario or the bottom? And I think one of the things that we also have to recognize is that not everybody wants to live in this scenario, but having diverse types of housing within a community is important. So for planners and developers, it's important to promote infill and redevelopment, develop in close proximity to existing infrastructure, existing urban areas, building from the inside out. Highlighting a few tools and strategies that local governments can use. A major factor in controlling growth is establishing boundaries for where communities can provide or have planned to provide infrastructure. Urban service districts are used throughout the state, and Martin County is no exception. You have many and different priority types for your urban service areas. But again, this is only effective if development is encouraged here and discouraged in other areas of the county. In contrast to that are special overlays, which identify areas that deserve special protections. The future land use element can designate areas and place specific development standards within those areas. So maybe less density, lower level of service for transportation. Marion County is an example. That's actually where I'm from, where there are certain standards for roadways and not only density limitations, but the types of use that can happen out there. And then targeted economic development programs like your Main Street program, they can leverage local funds to obtain state and federal dollars. The same can be said of community redevelopment areas. These types of programs create jobs by attracting industry, save tax dollars by improving the tax base, preserve historic resources, and build senses of place and pride in a community. Other community planning tools that might apply in Martin County are to encourage willing property owners to implement those market-based conservation programs, like taking advantage of the Rural and Family Lands programs or getting on the list for Florida Forever funding. Continuing to pursue acquisitions as part of the Loxalucy Headwaters Initiative, which 1,000 Friends have supported for many years. Discouraging development in areas without adequate water and sewer infrastructure that already exists. Discouraging freestanding urban service areas, and if those are to be approved, evaluate them in the context of Live Local, which is a fairly new regulation that requires local governments to allow residential development in industrial and commercial areas when a developer comes in with affordable housing or workforce housing products at a certain percentage. And then removing barriers to upzoning or additional units to promote organic infill in established neighborhoods. So those duplexes in maybe a historic home, not a historic home necessarily, but an older home that could be transitioned into a duplex, or an additional dwelling unit on a property to allow a mother-in-law to live with their family. And then for you all, the people in this room, attend your commission meetings and review the commission agendas. Become a citizen volunteer on a local planning agency. Engage with a local watchdog organization, such as the Guardians of Martin County. Follow 1,000 Friends of Florida and attend our webinars. We have a lot of really great information out there. If any of you were able to take advantage of our webinar today, it was on that Live Local Act, the new regulation or the new legislation in Florida. A couple of weeks ago, we did one on the Burt Harris Act. And then upcoming, we have a series of webinars based on protecting the Florida Wildlife Corridor. And with that, any questions? This is the time for our discussion.
Yeah, one of the things that makes Martin County unique is that our agricultural lands are zoned at 1 unit in 20 acres rather than 1 unit in 5. Was that taken into consideration when you were, we're already automatically about 75% less dense outside of the urban service boundary. Was that taken into consideration with this plan?
We didn't look at agricultural densities. We only looked at the, I don't know that was a part of the consideration. When the evaluation was done, the priority went to urban activities within the urban or development within the urban service boundaries, and then looking at again, proximity to roadways, coastal areas, and things like that. And so what happened was, within the 2040 context, all of that development was able to be accommodated within the urban growth boundary. And so there wasn't really an impact of those outside. It was considered as part of the initial baseline. But I'll let Paul also.
I was just going to, thanks, Jim. I was just going to say that in terms of the projections that the University of Florida does, those are based on the things that Kim mentioned, things that don't change, like proximity to highways and proximity to developed areas, because one of the things that you all have experienced here and happens all over the state is that zoning and even comprehensive plan provisions are subject to change depending on who happens to be behind the dais at the time. So rather than assume that a particular zoning category would continue to apply extending out decades in the future, what the University of Florida does is considers those other things that are not subject to the whims of whoever happens to be in charge at the time.
I'm going to go here and then right back.
Yeah, I'm Dick Roberts. I'm the vice chair of the Loxahatchee River Management Coordinating Council, and that's an organization that's been set up since 1985 to protect the scenic and wild river, and it also protects the Loxahatchee River watershed. And we have done like 3 very extensive management plans. The last one we just finalized last month, and that is for the whole watershed, and that's water quality work we're doing with animals and plants and exotics and current research we're doing on water quality. So it is a big plan that is just finished, and we have, as a council, which represents all local environmental groups and state agencies, finished that 300-page plan and sent it on to DEP and South Florida Water Management for their final approval. I'm saying this because I think that's, we have one group that's really has spent just an amazing amount of research. There's probably at least 50 papers, research papers out of that particular group. And you need to be kind of conscious that we are progressing with our next meeting, which I called as part of our group, is to discuss more protections for the Loxahatchee River watershed itself. And that is the result of the Jonathan Dickinson golf course problems and things like that. So we are going to be addressing that in the next meeting. But don't forget that we have a big group that's already doing just a tremendous amount of work, and it's scientific work. It's people with the community and everything else that are trying to protect this the watershed as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Dick, for sharing that. And Kim showed on one of her slides the so-called ecosystem services that are generated by preserving natural and, to a lesser extent, perhaps agricultural land. But there is a growing awareness and appreciation among state leaders and local leaders around the state. The Commissioner of Agriculture is starting to pick up on this as well, that there is a huge public value that is realized from preserving this kind of land. It's not just developed land that is valuable. Undeveloped land, even though it has a lower tax revenue, The other benefits that you get for it in terms of preserving water quality, in terms of purifying stormwater naturally, it's a fraction of the cost of the so-called gray infrastructure that's built to purify stormwater, manage stormwater. There is, it's not just that preserving a river, gives us all a warm feeling and feeds our soul, which of course it does. It also is good economics for the community, for the people who live there. So and fortunately there is a growing awareness of that. Kim mentioned that there is this pilot program that's going to pay farmers who follow best practices for protecting panthers. That's just scratching the surface. We all want to protect panthers, but there are so many other benefits that we can realize through protecting natural and agricultural land and protecting our waterways. So thanks to everybody who's involved in initiatives like that. It's good for the future, it's good for your neighbors.
And I'll just add to that within the conservation scenario, those lands that have land management plans were excluded from development potential as well.
Yes. Yes. I've been visiting some relatives over in the West Coast, and I passed a lot of mountains of garbage. And that's a tremendous employment of land. In your considerations, have you considered, since now in Miami they're up against issues about incineration, so that option may be off the table, where, with all this population coming in, where are we going to put the garbage? I mean, do the government buy the land, build the mountain of garbage, it gets filled up, and then where is the next stop? Where's the next piece of land that they're going to be, that will be available for purchase to put the garbage for all these 18 million people that projected to come? Again, with density, one house maybe produces so much garbage. One apartment building just multiplies how much more garbage is produced by that building. Have you considered accommodations when you do this clustering and put more density into an urban area? I didn't see it in any of your comments here, but there are a lot of, I mean, you go north to Fort Pierce, you go down to Fort Lauderdale, you see the mountains, and they're full. I mean, that's it. Not going to put any more there. So have you considered that in your plan?
Yeah, no, that is a good point. And I am not aware that the University of Central Florida, or University of Florida, sorry, Center for Landscape Conservation Planning included land use for landfills in their projections, but it's a valid point and maybe a refinement that can be added to future projections. The kind of, you may have seen from Kim's slide on the difference in density with a 30% increase. That's a relatively modest increase in density that would not force disruption of community character or things like the height limit, which I know is important in Martin County. A 30% increase can be modest, is a modest increase that can be accommodated through things like, as Kim mentioned, accessory dwelling units, or some instances of duplexes, and maybe in some neighborhoods that are appropriate. But the one of the other slides that she included was the slide on the Urban 3 study for the cost of services. And I believe in evaluating the cost of services associated with different kinds of development, they did include waste management. So it is included in that. But in terms of land projection, it would be an improvement to include that as well. So thank you for raising that point.
Thank you. So I really appreciate this presentation, and what I'm taking away from this is that our government within Florida and the culture within Florida currently for conservation has become more important, and this concept of preventing sprawl is something that's an initiative that we should be undertaking, and that we may have the environment or the culture now behind us to really say, the reason we're making this change is that we don't want to encourage sprawl. With that being said, there are land use designations within Martin County that are promoting and can promote sprawl. So and those who've got those land use designations for that assigned to them, more power to them. They're grandfathered in. But should our focus now be, with all this attention that we have and maybe the culture that's currently here, to go into Martin County and find those things within our comprehensive plan that are encouraging sprawl and put an end to them? And, I know rural lifestyle is a current topic or is, on everybody's tongue. Obviously, they're beautiful developments, right? You got all this land that's in conservation, and you've got the least amount of strain on our resources because the population is so small. But to me, I feel like that's just creating a daisy chain. They give us something we really want, but later down the road, it's going to erode, and we've expanded our urban service boundaries. Soon, that will become part of it. And so my question is, very simply, now that we have this culture and all this movement and all this excitement and all this talk about sprawl, can we actually put together a plan to say, let's update our comprehensive plan to stop those practices and those land use designations that are encouraging sprawl and leave those who got it alone and let them be grandfathered in?
And the projections from the University of Florida on the conservation scenario showed that the projected population increase could be accommodated within urban services districts. And does not have to extend beyond the current urban services districts. So I think the short answer is it is not necessary to sprawl to accommodate the population growth projected for Martin County. And it certainly is a defensible position and a kind of position that we support in principle. That you don't, there's really not a good economic reason for that. There is no practical reason for that. And certainly there are environmental costs to that.
I think any developments should be aware of, can they supply potable water for these developments? If they can't provide that because of saltwater intrusion into some of the wells that are happening all over, it's just climate change, how can these developers, if you have a fairly large developer, I don't care what kind of buildings, cottages, duplexes, or whatever, where is the potable water coming from? Because there's several years ago, there was a drought in the summertime, and Palm Beach County came within days of having no portable water. And of course, it's more highly built than here. I don't know the Martin County figures on that. But if we do have a drought, where is the potable water coming from?
Without speaking specifically to Martin County's water infrastructure, I think that goes back to the point of those more densely populated developments or filling in your urban services districts or urban services boundaries where you have a plan to put those services in already. So in those areas, presumably, you would either have planned or already have potable water available for development. And so prioritizing those over areas where you kind of hit the nail on the head, where you don't have it, prioritize, right. And you're going to have to expand your water and sewer infrastructure within your urban services boundary. And so I think sometimes we don't realize where those things are. So if it's in our backyard, but it's already planned for development, a lot of times we get antsy and we say, well, this is just sprawl. Well, it was possibly planned already. So we have to be aware of where those, and that comes to being an engaged citizen planner, is knowing where your urban services boundaries are and recognizing that there's going to be development within those areas. We're on our second round of comments. Okay. One more.
Thank you. Tom Lanahan, Treasure Coast Regional Planning Council. One clarification question and then a response on the solid waste stuff. So in the conservation scenario, you've said that the 18,000 additional people projected population for the county can be accommodated inside the urban service boundary. Does that require changing the existing comp plan designations on any of the land, or you use the existing designations to do that?
They considered a certain percentage of infill, and so I want to say that of that, we have a technical report coming out. I don't know the number off of the top of my head, but there is a certain percentage of that population that is anticipated to be accommodated through infill. So they did not look at changing urban land use designations in order to do that. Oh, sorry, a follow-up.
The other is more of a statement. I would suggest if people are interested in learning more about how we manage solid waste or trash, garbage, whatever term you want to use, fancy word solid waste. In our region right now, the Treasure Coast website, tcrpc.org, over the last 2 years, we've had summits with our partners down to the south, so covering Monroe, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, Martin, St. Lucie, and Indian River counties on the solid waste topic, number one, and then on recycling, number two. So one of the most important ways to deal with our solid waste problem is to divert as much as possible from the trash stream, and that's how recycling would benefit from that. Benefit us that way, and then other ways that we handle that stream going forward, whether that be waste to energy or other things. And then just a point of information, Martin County specific, the trash that is not recycled in Martin County goes off-site to landfill in Okeechobee County. So that's why you don't see a big landfill in Martin County, because it's sent to Okeechobee County. And so, yeah, check that out on our website, tcrpc.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. There's a pretty lively debate going on now. You referred to the Miami-Dade incinerator debate. There are plenty of people who are arguing that through better management, through recycling, through other provisions, they could avoid building a new incinerator, which will be expensive and could have some environmental impacts, unavoidable environmental impacts associated with it. So solid waste, how best to manage it is a growing issue in Florida with our growing population.
As I remember a few years ago, Yeah. So I remember a few years ago, the state of Florida went through a population projection, that we were, like other counties, were supposed to try our best to adhere to, and I guess that's part of the EAR report. Are you aware of that? Is it compatible with, I think, if I say it right, only a 10% increase in population to 2040?
The figures that the University of Florida Center for Landscape Conservation Planning used came from another part of the University of Florida, the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, which is the, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, Kim, but I believe that is the go-to source for population projections for most local governments when they're considering changes or updates to their comprehensive plans. So they do a low, intermediate, and high projection, and the one that was used for these land use projections was the intermediate projection. These things can always change. I mean, who saw, for example, the COVID pandemic coming and the great changes that led to unexpected changes in population and economy here. So it is a projection, but it certainly events could change it over the years.
Coming behind you.
I have a question, and I'm Geraldine Jenko. I'm with the Treasured Lands, and I work with the Loxalucy Headwaters Initiative. I've been involved in planning since the mid-'70s, and I believe the definition of a planned unit development is when you're clustering the homes, and by doing that on a piece of property, you're leaving a greater amount of open space. I don't think that there's any argument that that's the definition of a PUD. When we have zoning regulations that allow that concept to go outside of the urban service district, and it's going to be basically development of agricultural lands, is that a plus for conservation or is it a minus for conservation? What is a professional opinion?
Yeah, Mike, I'll weigh in on this, and then I'll also invite Kim to. But certainly our principle at 1,000 Friends is that, I mean, we welcome development features like clustering and conservation, but we would still prefer development to be directed toward urban service, within urban services districts, because they have the infrastructure to absorb it efficiently for taxpayers. They're just for the kind of benefits in a clustered and conservation development. Those benefits are offset by other negatives of having to stretch infrastructure to reach it, the additional cost of that, and maybe serving as a beachhead for other kinds of development nearby that don't have the same positive features. So even with those beneficial features that you mentioned, we still favor development within urban services districts.
Yeah, I would echo that. So first priority, development within the urban services district. If a local government is going to allow development outside of an urban services district in an agricultural area, then clustering development is the better option than traditional development. But those clustered type communities can work not only in those more rural areas, but they can work within your urban area. So setting aside lands for recreation or habitat within even an urbanized area is always a great idea. So a PUD can apply, again, within your urban core as well. Anybody else? All right, now we're on round two.
Let me introduce myself. Dick Roberts. I'm the vice chair of, again, the Loxahatchee River Management Recording Council. I'm also a retired DEP district biologist as well. I'm still trying to focus back in on Martin County and some of these examples that I've been working on, and some of these people are the same here in the same room. We did have the Hope Sound Plantation project that it was going to be 12,000 people right adjacent to John the Dickinson. And that was a big fight for us as a DRI. But the advantage there is that agencies got together and we got to analyze everything on that project. And we had, again, the people, local people got involved. I credit my wife too, because she headed that project to oppose it. So we have all these people are working on trying to make sure that this thing complied. But what I'm telling you, we've got 3 or 4 boxes of stuff that talks about traffic. It talks about water quality. It talks about managing the land. The development was actually tried to preclude any type of prescribed burning we're having in John the Dickinson State Park. So all that stuff went through a very extensive review. That's one thing. Now, the second thing we're doing on the Loxahatchee City Wild River Plan is looking at salinity increases because of global warming. That is a problem that we're looking on the river, but we've also identified that this is all coastal rivers, riverine systems up and down the whole eastern United States. We are being able to figure out a little bit what is causing that, and we are actually being able to show the results of that. So we have to be kind of concerned about how much water we're getting and then the balance between the water coming down and what we're going to do. And then the last thing is the town of Jupiter and that whole area has protected the Loxahatchee watershed and all the way from the coast all the way to I-95 because they got septic tanks off the river. There is, and I can't say enough about how wonderful Bill Lund came down in the 70s and said, we are going to protect this damn river and we're going to get the septic tanks off the floodplain. So, thank you.
Before you get to the next question, Kim, just a couple of things that Dick mentioned. He mentioned the Jonathan Dickinson State Park proposal. You all may remember that it was one of, I believe, 9 state parks where development of various kinds, hardscaping of various kinds was proposed. Golf courses or pickleball courts, or in a couple of cases, 350-room lodges. There was such an outpouring of opposition to that plan was abandoned within a couple of weeks. I'd encourage everybody to stay on the lookout just in case it comes back. But everybody who is concerned about whether or not ordinary citizens still have power to alter the course of their communities and protect the natural assets in their communities should take some encouragement and hope from how that turned out. There were a lot of people who came together, and there was no separation on partisan lines on that. It's been my experience all over Florida that the desire to protect natural assets crosses party lines. This is not a partisan issue. We love our natural resources, our natural treasures here in Florida. We may disagree and fight about other things, but we all pretty much agree on that. The other thing I wanted to mention was planning for climate change impacts, whether it's sea level rise, which is depicted in some of these charts that we have and that Kim showed on her slides, or saltwater intrusion, which is an increasing factor that is going to have to be planned for in our water management. The leaders in Tallahassee have a reputation now for ignoring it, for changing state law to remove reference to it in energy policy. But the fact is, in the most recent budget that was passed, they dedicated $250 million to resilience planning and adaptation in communities around Florida. And that was the third year in a row that they've made substantial investments in that. So that is definitely a factor to build into future planning, and it's actually something that the governor and the legislature continue to invest in.
Yeah. And I also wanted to kind of respond to your comment about the DRI being a catalyst to this public engagement that has now led to this volumes and volumes of work that you've been able to do. And so that potentially disastrous project with the help of engaged citizens is now areas that can be preserved. So I think we have to recognize that it is engaged citizens, as Paul just mentioned, who are changing the face of Florida for the better and the worse. I had a couple of other questions, so one sec. Yeah.
DRI is development of regional impact, right? Okay. I just have another, this is probably a little, it's about, back to the garbage. Are you aware of any movement, either local or statewide, towards supporting household or community composting? Because a lot of our waste is that kind of waste. And I know that does present challenges in Florida, but I'm curious, because I do it in California, there's other states that do this. It's a little gross sometimes. I'm just curious, because that would be another huge, progressive, forward-thinking, preventative approach to waste.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any state policies in the legislature that have promoted composting. I think generally that would be the kind of initiative that would be undertaken at the county or municipal level. The only risk there is that sometimes the legislature, when a county or a municipal policy moves out front to beyond the point where somebody in Tallahassee is comfortable, they preempt it. I know I've heard the commissioners here complaining, and I don't blame them, about preemption from the state on local authority. But another principled position from us is that these kinds of local decisions are best left to local leaders who are most directly accountable to their constituents.
As I understand, golf cottages, employee dorms, and smaller additional structures behind a main one are not considered in density, but I think they should be. With you have an increase in population, this will only be even more. The rural lifestyle also says golf courses and polo fields are part of the open land, not just regular undeveloped land. That's not so great, and we need to slow down the expansion of the rural lifestyle outside the USBs. Lastly, encourage regenerative agriculture and environmental cattle ranching to help keep agriculture viable.
Agreed?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, we got two back here.
Hi, I'm Linda Smith from Hope Sound, and I wanted to expand upon a quick point that Kim made in regards to open spaces, smaller open spaces within the urban higher urban density. I can see the benefit for the environment of encouraging higher urban density, but, we as individuals and people, one of the things that we have that, we see our neighbors saying, no more building in our area. Those people still crave to be able to walk out their front door and walk down the street or take a bike ride down the street and hit a small little park area. So if we are able to move in a higher density position moving forward, I would encourage those in the position to make these decisions to keep that in mind and try and keep some open spaces available, little pockets here and there. And as citizens, we should keep that in mind and fight for that as things move forward.
Yeah, and I think we would generally agree with that. There is a way, I've used several times, and I think Kim did, the modifier of modest density increases. Modest would mean you wouldn't have to sacrifice green spaces. You wouldn't have to threaten the height limit in Martin County, which is important to many people in Martin County. So I think it is important to strike a balance that respects the character of communities when you pursue modest increases in density.
Yes, to expand a little bit more on the question I was talking about earlier, in the study that you've done, obviously we live in the urban service boundary, right? So this concept of no sprawl affects the quality of our lives here in the urban service boundary. So in your overview or your projections that you did you take into consideration mobility and changes to Martin County's infrastructure that would be needed to have these communities move, work, shop, play within the urban service boundary now that we've created the density, right? We're all kind of pigeonholed by the Roosevelt Bridge and a few things like that. But was a transportation element also in there to make sure we had adequate infrastructure and roadways to allow this dense population to move in a way that's enjoyable and still, promote a good quality of life?
Right. And the University of Florida projections do not consider the impact on urban services to accommodate additional population within the urban services district. That's obviously a factor that communities will have to plan for if they develop that way. Now, the Urban 3 report that Kim also referred to showed that in general, it was not Martin County specific, but in general, the cost of services to accommodate a population within a developed area is less expensive than the services that would apply to serve them in a sprawling area. Yep.
I think there's some general assumption that within an urban services area, you would already be planning for the infrastructure that is necessary to accommodate that additional density. And I don't want to speak out of turn. It's something that we need to probably ask our researchers at UF, but just to verify that I know that they did use the future land use maps as part of their analysis. So I don't believe, but I'll double check, that they increased density to a point where it would have changed any of the future land use designations within that urban area to the.
Roadways. And in order to do this, obviously roadways have got to be constructed and widened. So was that property taken out of your considerations that it could house a person when it's really going to be needed for infrastructure? That's really my question. You've done this study, you've said that we can support it, but can we support it also setting aside the proper amount of land we would need to create roadways and schools and firehouses and all that to provide the services, even though they're cheaper, to provide the services for this new plan to cluster people in the urban service boundary. And I just can't get you that takeaway from this.
I I think that's a good question, and we can get back to you on that. We'll make sure that we ask. But I do, again, want to reiterate that within an urban services boundary, you would expect that there is a certain level of planning, that a level of service that's associated with those potentially densely populated areas.
Right, you're feeding us a number, and it may not be accurate.
Okay, we'll double check on that.
Yeah, it strikes me also that, you know, if we're talking about a 30% increase in density, are we also talking about a 30% increase in impervious surfaces?
They didn't address impervious area, but it doesn't necessarily result in let's say that you go up your one-story building and then now you are two-story building to accommodate an additional dwelling unit, you're not increasing your density, your impervious areas necessarily. Right. And again, this is a possibility, not a prediction of what's actually going to happen, and the scope of the project was limited to kind of where is your density going to go. Those infrastructure questions still are to be determined by the local government.
So we'll, out of respect for everybody's time, we'll take maybe one or two more questions.
Thank you. Linda Horstmeyer, I'm with the League of Women Voters. And what is the single most important takeaway you'd like us to leave with after this evening?
I think that what we discussed as the most important takeaway is that the expected population over the planning horizon to 2040 can be accommodated within your urban services boundary. So there is not a necessity to increase that or approve developments necessarily that are outside of those urban service areas.
Yeah.
Did I miss something else?
No.
Oh, and also become engaged citizens.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.